Folks, welcome to the Greater Denver College Fair program. College Fairs of Greater Denver Incorporated. This is a portion of the Colorado Virtual College Fair program through StriveScan. A few housekeeping reminders. You can ask questions through this particular format through the Q&A button within your toolbar, your Zoom toolbar. The presenters will try to keep up to date with the Q&A as they were presenting. And the hope is to leave some time at the end to answer questions from the chat that don't get answered, from the Q&A that don't get answered. A reminder, your camera and your microphone are off, so the panelists cannot see you or hear you. I will encourage you throughout this particular program through Greater Denver to continue to register for the presentations that are being offered and the virtual college fairs that are happening in conjunction with this program. Slots are still open. And finally, a recording of this will be available online at the same page that you used to register for this particular program. Now, without further ado, we have Lisa Briggs from the University of Colorado, Denver, and Nashua Bowling from the University of Denver, presenting on the topic of navigating financial aid. Thank you, ladies, for joining us tonight.
All right, well, good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us to go over some basics of financial aid, so navigating the financial aid maze. Once again, my name is Nashua Bowling, and I'm with the University of Denver, and we are gonna go over a presentation in the next 30 minutes or so, trying to leave some time at the end to answer questions. But we're gonna try to cover some of the financial aid basics and make sure that you're familiar with some of our frequently used terms within the world of financial aid. So the COA, cost of attendance, expected family contribution, which is the EFC, talking about awards, award types, talking about other financial aid applications beyond the FAFSA, and then a brief conversation about what it would look like for a DACA or undocumented students to apply for aid within the state of Colorado. And then I'll hand it on over to Lisa, who's gonna really talk about the federal aid eligibility and the FAFSA and going into the nitty-gritty process of applying using the FAFSA, whether you use the IRS data retrieval tool, discussing dependency status, different types of ways to complete it in terms of what you need to do for signature, and then setting up that FSA ID, excuse me, and then any kind of special circumstances with verification, appeals, and adjustments, okay? So just to give you a general idea of what we're gonna do in the next 30 minutes or so. We will have our direct contact information on the last slide. So if you do have very specific questions to your family, please email us directly rather than putting that question in the Q&A for everyone to see. All right, so the Financial Aid Office, what do we do? So we establish the cost of attendance, also known as the COA or that sticker price, so how much it costs to go to that university. We evaluate your family's ability to pay by determining an expected family contribution, that's the EFC. We're trying to offer need-based scholarships, grants, loans, work study based on that cost of attendance and that expected family contribution in order for us to distribute resources in the most equitable manner possible. And then we work with families and students one-on-one to counsel them on any financial issues, any questions that they might have about this process. So to get into the first acronym of the night, cost of attendance, okay? So this is broken up into two different components. We have the direct cost and indirect cost. direct costs are the items that the university is going to bill you for, okay? So you're going to get a bill for tuition and fees and room and board if you're living on campus. Now, indirect costs are items that are a part of the cost of going to school, but the school isn't going to bill you for books. The school isn't going to bill you for transportation or personal expenses, but you do have to build that into your budget, right? I always like to give students an example of books. You know, there's a general line item for the average cost for books, but the actual cost can vary student per student. So for example, a biology major, their textbooks might be much more than, let's say, the English major, who's just gonna be buying different novels to read, just as an example. So the indirect costs are the items that are averages across the board, but the actual costs can vary from student to student. And then once again, direct costs are the things that you're gonna get a bill for from the university. Indirect costs are items that you need to be planning for, but you're not going to get an actual bill for those. So how do we go about determining that expected family contribution? First of all, what is it? It's a number that colleges use to determine how much your student may be eligible for in terms of financial aid, okay? And we use the financial aid applications to determine the expected family contribution. The one that everyone's going to have to do is the FAFSA. That's the free application for federal student aid that Lisa's going to talk about a little bit later. Okay, so that's the one everyone does. Now, there are schools, usually private schools, that might have additional financial aid applications. The University of Denver is an example of this. We require the CSS Profile, and this is an additional application. I'll go into a little bit of detail on this shortly. But then there's also some schools that have their own institutional financial aid application. A good example of this is like Dartmouth. Dartmouth will require all of their students to do the FAFSA, and then their students will also have to do the Dartmouth financial aid application. So once again, majority of students will only have to fill out the FAFSA, but I do recommend that students start doing research on the schools that you're applying to make sure that if your school requires more than the FAFSA, you're well aware of that. And once again, it's typically private schools that require additional applications, but not always. So just make sure that you got all of your I's dotted and your T's crossed, and you go onto the website of those schools to see what kind of applications you need to submit, okay? So when it comes to using the financial applications to determine aid eligibility, what the schools are, or what the formula is for calculating that expected family contribution, it's usually looking at a family's taxed and untaxed income sources, any assets that they may have. For the FAFSA, that's not going to include your home. Benefits such as employment, Social Security, and then some other factors that will come into play are the family size and then the number of the family members who are going to attend college or technical school. So all of these can help determine what that expected family contribution actually ends up being, okay? Now the CSS Profile, like I mentioned earlier, is an additional application. There's about 400 schools nationwide that require this form. In state, the only ones that I'm aware of and found online is just University of Denver and Colorado College down in the Springs. So the private schools, or these two private schools here in state. This one is not free. So unlike the FAFSA, the CSS Profile does have a $25 fee in order to complete it, but there are waivers available through schools as well as automatically done based on like if you got an SAT waiver, because the CSS Profile is done by the same company that does the SATs, so College Board. So if you qualified for an SAT fee waiver, you oftentimes automatically qualify for the CSS Profile waiver. It will look at a lot of the same information as the FAFSA, but it will look at a lot of additional information. So if a family has assets, you know, this one can look at home equity. If you have more extensive investments. It asks for a lot more information on that. And then additionally, it can ask for financial information from a non-custodial parent. So if parents are divorced or no longer together or were never married, the CSS profile can ask for financial information from both parents, which isn't the case for the FAFSA. So all that to say, the CSS profile does go into much more depth in the financial resources from a family. But once again, you know, there's only about 400 schools nationwide that require this. So just make sure you're doing your research again to see what schools that you're applying to, what they need, and what you need to submit. So when it comes to determining financial need, this is a calculation of that cost of attendance, so that total sticker price, minus that expected family contribution. And what's left over is financial need, okay? Now, what I really want you to get from this is that financial need varies based on the cost of the school, okay? So let's just put in some numbers here. So let's say you have a cost of attendance of $10,000. Let's say your expected family contribution is $5,000. Your financial need at that institution is $5,000, okay? Your expected family contribution is the same no matter where you go or where you apply when you submit that FAFSA. So let's say then you're applying to another school that's more of a high-priced institution, and let's say that cost of attendance is $50,000. Your expected family contribution is still $5,000, which means that now your financial need is $45,000. So this is what that financial need is, what us schools, what we're looking for to meet. That's what we're trying to offer you in scholarships and grants and work study and maybe loans to help make that an affordable option. So I usually try to tell families that you can't look at the sticker price and determine if that college is going to be affordable for your family or not, because it's not the sticker price, it's your financial need that matters. And specifically what percent of your financial need a college can meet, okay? So most schools cannot meet 100% of your financial need. But, you know, if a school can meet 93%, or do they meet 60%, you know, depending on where that lands, it may be enough to make that an affordable option for your family. So what's really important is that you go through the process. You apply for financial aid and wait until you get that award letter to make your final decision, okay? And once again, you don't just look at that sticker price, because you don't know what aid they're gonna offer you to see if that's going to be an affordable option. At the University of Denver, I worked with many families who have received an award letter from our school and have been surprised that it's pretty comparable to the costs of what they might have to pay at one of our in-state publics because of the aid that we offer. That doesn't happen all the time, but it does happen. And so it's important for you to just apply and go through the process to see what your aid offer is going to be at the end of the day. So the different types of aid, when you receive your financial aid offer or you receive your award letter, these are two interchangeable terms that you might hear. On there, you might have scholarships and grants, and this is the free money, right? This is the money that we all want. And they can be based on financial need from your financial aid applications. They might be based on merit. So when you applied for admission, maybe the admission office offered you a scholarship, or it's based on your major, you know, you're a business major, and so they offered you a business scholarship. It can be a combination of both of those, right? Merit and need. And then you have talent-based scholarships if you're an athlete, a musician, an artist, theater student, etc. So the federal and state grants that we have, those are offered typically to students who are from lower socioeconomic backgrounds and their families. Then you get into student employment, so work study. This is where you work on campus for 10 to 20 hours a week. And just like any other job, you're paid an hourly wage and you get paid on a bi-weekly schedule, okay? But this money goes straight to your bank account if you have direct deposit, or it's a check sent directly to you. So those wages are not automatically put towards your tuition bill or anything like that. So it's going to be up to you as the student or you as the parent working with your student to help figure out how those work-study funds are going to be utilized. Is it going to be saved to help pay the tuition bill maybe for the next semester? Or are you going to use those funds to help pay for your books? Are you going to use that money for the gas that maybe you need or the bus pass? Are you using that money for Chipotle and movies and that kind of stuff? So that's where this personal budgeting and personal money management comes into play. But it is a great way to gain some valuable work experience and something to put on your resume for when you graduate college and you're out there applying for your first job. Okay. And then loans, the last one, the money that nobody's excited about because it's the money that you have to pay back. These are direct loans with the federal government, and that's both the direct subsidized loan and the direct unsubsidized loan. The direct subsidized loan is the one that is based on financial need and does not accrue interest while you're in school. And then the direct unsubsidized loan does accrue interest while you're in school. Parents can also borrow to help pay for the students' educational expenses, but these loans are in the parent's name, and that's coming from the federal government, and it's the Parent Plus loan, and it is a credit-based loan that parents have to apply for. And then there's always the option of private loans with your bank or your credit union if they have a competitive rate. So what does an award letter look like? This is just an example, and there's a couple of sections that you will often see on an award letter. The thing for you to know is that there isn't a standard though for every school. So award letters can look differently, and so it's really important to really become familiar with what's on it and how it might differ from school to school, so that when you're comparing these side by side, you're comparing apples to apples, or you understand the ways in which it's different. Most schools will have that tuition breakdown or that cost of attendance, right? And this is where they'll put the cost of tuition and fees and maybe the estimated costs for room and board, transportation, other educational costs. So that's where they'll have both the indirect and the direct cost of attendance. And then the section for their gift, their grants and scholarship or other gift aid typically. And so that's, once again, that's that free money. And then they might break it down to have a cost, right? So what's the actual cost to you? So that's the cost of attendance minus your aid. That's that net price, okay? That net cost to you. And then there's usually additional resources that are on there to help you pay for those costs, whether it's loans and then the work study section. But depending on the school, the loans especially may or may not be included in that cost breakdown. And so you have to really look and see, what are the net costs if that school has the loans in there. Especially some schools will package you automatically with a Parent Plus loan, even if you didn't apply for one. So it'll look like your costs are zero, but it's because they've already included a Parent Plus loan. It's not common, but this is where you have to be familiar with the award letters and really how it's laid out to see where loans are coming in to that cost equation. And then once again, work study, it's offered in there, but it's not usually used to reduce your costs because it doesn't apply directly. You get a paycheck and it's up to you to use that to help pay for, well, it's up to you to choose how to use that to pay for school or other educational indirect costs, okay? Your family contribution, it depends on the school. Some schools will put that on there. It typically comes to you from the FAFSA. I think Lisa will talk about that shortly. And then depending on the school, they might include some graduation rate information as well as loan information in terms of what the average student graduates with from the school, median borrowing, those kind of items. But that's not required. And so some schools will include that information, some schools will not include it. All right, so when it comes to DACA and undocumented students, I'm going to first start with make sure you contact each school for information on their application process because it can vary. I believe the state is in the process of trying to create a one system for at least all the public schools, but I don't think that's online yet. So I think you do have to apply to each of the public schools individually for right now. And then the privates, you definitely have to reach out to those offices to figure out what the application process is. And that's just in state, right? These are just the Colorado schools. So we have the asset bill, and this allows eligible DACA or undocumented students to pay in-state tuition at the Colorado public colleges and universities, as well as be eligible to receive Colorado student aid or Colorado state aid. So students who attended a Colorado high school for at least 3 years and graduated from a Colorado high school may qualify for asset. Now, the important thing for you to know is that students who qualify for asset do not automatically qualify for DACA and vice versa. So just because you're asset doesn't mean that you're a DACA student. Just because you're DACA doesn't mean you have asset, okay? So it's really important to make sure that you go through the application process and to ensure that you meet the criteria for asset, because asset is going to be what determines if you can receive the in-state tuition and that Colorado state aid. And once again, I'm going to refer you to speak to the financial aid office at each of the Colorado schools that you're applying to, because they will be able to walk you through the process at their institution to make sure that you get all the paperwork in that you need and can qualify for the aid if you are eligible for it. All right, and now I'm going to hand it on over to Miss Lisa.
Okay, so let me share my screen. Oh, we went back to the beginning. Sorry about that. Get there real quick. Okay, so when applying for financial aid, and you're using the FAFSA application, so those, as Nasha was saying, that are undocumented may not be able to use the FAFSA, the CSS profile or the FAFSA application. And that's if a parent does not have a SSN number, then they can still complete the FAFSA application, but would have to put in all zeros as their Social Security number. But students that are U.S. citizens or permanent residents are eligible to complete the FAFSA application to be considered for federal student aid. So even when parents are not live within the United States, or they do, and whether they have a Social Security number or not, they would still have to complete the FAFSA application for the students. So when applying through the FAFSA application, the student and parent will need to provide their information on the FAFSA application. And the information that they will provide would be partially their income information, and there's something called a prior year program, where they would provide their income and federal tax information for 2 years prior. So for example, if we have any students that are graduating actually this December 2020, and they plan to start college in January or during the summer term, they would have to provide 2 years prior from the fall 2020 start. So they would need the 2018 tax information. So those students that are graduating in May of 2021, 2 years prior to their start term of 2021 is 2019, so they would have to provide the 2019 information on the FAFSA and apply for the FAFSA that will be available on October 1st for the 2021-22 school year. So because of COVID, there are some opportunities where parents and families may have had a change in their circumstances, or even without COVID, before that COVID hit us, some families may have had job loss, reduction in income, death of a parent, or illness where now there's medical expenses that's not being covered by insurance. Families may divorce. There may be other unusual circumstances that may occur after the student has submitted their FAFSA application. This is when you would submit an appeal to the financial aid office. And what they would do is look at the information that you provided on the FAFSA, have you document what the circumstances were and the changes and what your anticipated income would be for the current academic year, and they can make those adjustments to your FAFSA application to see if they can award additional funding for you. So anytime there's any change in your circumstances, don't feel like you can't go to school or you have to drop out, always contact the financial aid office. Be very clear with them about what your circumstances are so they can figure out the best way to support you. When using the FAFSA application, there's a process called the IRS Database Retrieval Tool, or the DRT. What this is, it allows you to access your tax information through the Internal Revenue Service database system. You can locate your tax information, and it can automatically be inputted into the FAFSA application on your behalf. This is for the student as well as the parents, so that you're not having to figure out which number goes on which line of the FAFSA application. You will need something called a FSID and username and password, and a copy of your tax return in front of you, as well as the schedules that you filed with your tax return, in order to correctly access this website. It's very sensitive. The information has to match exactly the way it is on your tax return for you to be able to retrieve it and have the information downloaded. So for example, on your tax return, if your name is Stephen F. Smith, and when you put in the information to request it through the data retrieval tool, you put Stephen Frank Smith. So it's not going to match, because if you put in, if your tax return says F, but you write out the name Frank, it's not going to match. Same thing with addresses. They have to match exactly the way, because there's so many tax returns, they have to be able to match your tax return to your data. It also looks at your Social Security number, your date of birth, as well as your address. So all of that has to match for them to be able to find your tax information and load it to the FAFSA for you on your behalf. A good reason to do this, because that could mean that you're not selected for verification through the financial aid office, where the federal government taxed the financial aid office to verify the information that you put on the FAFSA. But if you use the data retrieval tool, it's coming directly from the Internal Revenue Service, so it's already verified, and so therefore you won't get laid with that particular process. So there are some circumstances where families may not be able to use the data retrieval tool. Then you would have to manually input the information on the FAFSA. So you can do that. It will spell out very clearly which line is associated with each number. So you just got to be very careful to input the right information. So if it does go through, then it'll give you the option to transfer the information to your FAFSA application, and it will expedite the process for you. So who must provide the information on the FAFSA application? So the student, and if the student is married, the student and their spouse. If the student is not married, they're considered dependent on their parents up until the age of 24 for financial aid purposes. That's regardless of whether the student is paying their own rent, their car note, whatever. Up until the age of 24, for federal student aid purposes, they are dependent on their parents. So parents is defined as biological parents, or their the parents that birthed them, or adoptive parents. They were legally adopted. You have court documents to support that. Both information is included on the FAFSA if they're still married, and parents that are living separate, that may have been divorced but still living in the same household, will both have to provide the information on the FAFSA. In the case of divorce or legally separated, then the parent that provides at least 51% of the support for the student should be the one who's completing the FAFSA application. Doesn't matter whether the student lives with you or not. Doesn't matter who claims the students on their taxes. The financial aid process does not consider that at all. If the parents divorce but then remarry, and the one that remarry is the one that's providing the 51% of the support for that student, then that parent plus the step parent must provide their information on the FAFSA because you're all part of the same household. So there are some situations where a student may be considered an independent student and they're under the age of 24. So to satisfy that, the student has to be born before January 1st of 1998, married at the time they submit the FAFSA, if they're a veteran, if the student has their own children or a spouse that they are providing more than half the support for, not that the parents are providing the support, but that the student can prove that they are providing all the support for that dependent, then they could be considered an independent student. If the student was orphaned, in foster care or ward of the court, meaning they were removed from their home for their own safety. If the student is an emancipated minor or in a legal guardianship, then they could be considered independent. If the student is unaccompanied or homeless or at risk of being homeless, they're couch surfing, they're sleeping in their car, they're staying at a friend's house, away from their parents, then they could be considered an independent student. And all of this has to be documented. When you complete the FAFSA application, it will go through these general questions and ask you if you meet any of this criteria. Say yes. It won't look for parent information because you're being considered as an independent student, but then that will prompt the financial aid office to reach out to you. Then you would have to provide documentation to support your independent status. That usually consists of a personal statement regarding your circumstances and whatever court documents, letters from professionals that can sort of support your circumstances. And you would want to hold on to that information because you have to re-verify that information every single year that you submit the FAFSA. And there are other circumstances where a student may be estranged from their family that they could be considered an independent student. So always reach out to the financial aid office and let them know what your circumstances are so they can figure out the best way to support you. So for student aid eligibility, for federal student aid, a student has to be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident, have a high school diploma or a GED, have a valid Social Security number or permanent resident number. Once they start school after their first semester in college, they have to meet satisfactory academic progress, meaning that they are progressing towards graduation. They have at least a 2.0 GPA at the end of each semester. They're passing at least 67% of their courses each semester, and they are progressing towards graduating on time within 150% time frame, which is usually about a 6-year time frame to complete their degree, whether they're going full-time or part-time. So all males must register for selective service between the ages of 18 and 25. They have to do this in order to be eligible to receive federal student aid. And I must repeat that it's all males that were born males. That's a new law that was added to the regulations a few years ago. They must register for selective service. So at the time that the student completes the FAFSA, they may only be 17. The FAFSA application will ask them, well, you're not 18 yet, but when you on your 18th birthday, do you want us to register you? Always say yes. Therefore, you don't forget about it and it doesn't delay the process with financial aid, and they will automatically register you for selective service on your 18th birthday. Also for eligibility, student has to be enrolled in a program actively working towards completing a degree. You can't just be taking classes, but you have to be pursuing an actual degree to graduate. And lastly, must not, once school has started, be suspended, be convicted of a controlled substance. Otherwise, your financial aid can be suspended. So no conviction of a drug-related offense or your financial aid will be suspended. So this is a list of the various different information. Nashua went over some of this that you need in order to complete the FAFSA application. So you would need your 2019 federal tax returns if you're planning to start school in fall of 2021. W-2s, income information. There are some circumstances where you may not make enough and you're not required to file a tax return. The FAFSA will ask you, if you're not required to file, there's a box you can check and therefore it won't look for tax return information. but you still may have to verify any income that you may have made that was under that threshold. Okay, so driver's license, social security numbers. If you don't have your social security card or know your numbers now, I highly urge you to request that now. If there's a change in name and it's different than what's on file with the Social Security Administration, you need to make sure that your name matches what's on file with the Social Security Administration, because that's one of the checks that the FAFSA application will do. Okay, date of birth, number of folks in your household that is dependent on your parents, and then an estimate of cash, checking, and savings account. Just an estimate, it doesn't have to be exact. Okay, most common errors with the FAFSA application is that typo in the names, it doesn't match Social Security number, date of birth with the Social Security Administration. Sometimes if the parent or student are having to manually put in their financial information on the FAFSA, they may put in the taxes paid as the same amount of their income or your adjusted gross income, and you can't do that because that means that you paid as much tax as you earned, so you didn't have money to pay for any of your living expenses. Another common error is that males don't register for selective service. You have to register for selective service. And another component is that there's missing signatures. So either you forget to submit or you don't use the FSID. Now there are circumstances if parents don't have a valid Social Security number, they won't be able to create a FSID. And the FSID basically serves as your electronic signature to be able to submit the FAFSA. So it's okay if you don't have a Social Security number, you just put in all zeros on the FAFSA. When you get to the end, save it. Before you submit it, then you want to print out the signature page. Print out the signature page, sign it, and mail it in. The address will be listed on that signature page, so you'll know exactly where to send it. The advantage of using FSID is that you can get the results back within 3 to 5 business days. If you have to mail in the signatures, it could take anywhere between 4 and 6 weeks for the FAFSA to be processed and submitted to the schools for processing. So FSID, again, both the student and at least one parent will have to create an FSID. You do have to have a valid Social Security number or a permanent resident number in order to create it. To create the username and password, there will be certain criteria that you'll have to meet, and we'll talk about that shortly. But the FSID username is valid for 10 years. You have to do this FAFSA application every single year. So every October, you will be renewing the information that you put on the FAFSA the prior year. It will be asking for your username and your password. Your password is good for 18 months, but you'll be updating and revising it every 12 months because you'll be doing the FAFSA over every 12 months. So keep this information in a safe place, because again, it serves as your electronic signature and gives you access to other federal student databases as well. So when you apply for the FAFSA application, you want to go to this website here, fafsa.ed.gov. Make sure it says .gov. If it doesn't say .gov, then you're in the wrong place. If you're on there and you're filling it out and it's asking you for $59.55, in the wrong place. This form is free. You don't have to pay anyone to complete this form for you. If you need help with it, you can contact any college, your high school counselors and teachers. There's always going to be FAFSA nights and financial aid nights at your school, so make sure you attend those events to get help with the FAFSA application. But this is the first page of what it looks like. So there's a tab for the student to log in and start the FAFSA application. And they will use their username and password in order to gain access to that. And then this is the section if the parent was logging on. So there's a section for them, but the parents cannot use their FSID and username to submit it. You have to have the student's credentials in order to move forward in the FAFSA process. So the student will be asked to create a save key, and this is basically like a PIN number or a special word between the student and the parent that if you get kicked out of the system or if you're not together completing the FAFSA application, that someone else can access your FAFSA to complete it on your behalf. So who should create the FSID? So again, The parent should create the FSID at the same time that the student is doing theirs, because you'll be on the same page to complete it. And you should also, there's something you should be creating now before October 1st, so that all the verification checks will be over with. And when it's time to submit the FAFSA, there won't be any delays. Creating the FSID and password is the hardest part of this whole process, because there's so many verification checks to make sure that no one's trying to steal your information or your identity. So the website to go to create the FSID is the fsaid.ed.gov website. Again, it should always say .gov, and then you will click the Create the FSID tab, create your username and your password, and then you will move forward in the process. So at least the student and at least one parent should have their own email account, because that's another check. They will send you a confirmation and a code to your email that you will have to input through the FAFSA process to verify your information. Same thing as far as the cell number. You should have a valid cell number that's available also, because they will send a code that you will need to utilize in order to verify that you are who you are and no one's trying to steal your identity. Students should not use their high school email address, because they will not always have access to that after they graduate. So when creating an FSID username, anywhere between 60 and 30 characters, combination of number, uppercase letters, lowercase letters. Do not use any personal information like your name, your date of birth, something that someone may know about you and it gives them opportunity to steal your identity. As far as creating a password, at least 3 of the following criteria. Special symbols, numbers, upper, lowercase numbers in order to create your password. Make it unique so that no one can sort of figure it out. Okay? Always use your legal name and your social security number exactly as it appears on your social security card. Otherwise, they won't be able to verify it, and it will be flagged or rejected. Okay? Okay. So one last thing you'll be asked to create when trying to develop your username and password is to select some challenge questions. They will have a list of ones that you can pick from. Make sure you're picking some that you're going to remember the answers for. Your student will have to pick their own challenge questions when they're creating their username and password, and the parents will have to create their own. Write them down. You may want to create a little financial aid folder where you can keep this stuff in it, because you will have to remember it from year to year. And you will also be asked to create 1 or 2 questions on your own. So make sure you're picking a question and answering it correctly so you'll remember from year to year. So if you've forgotten your username or password, no problem. Just go back to that website, go to the section that says Manage My FSID. You can click on Forget My Username or Forget My Password, and then it will take you to a page to help you access that. If you still have problems, there's an 800 number for FAFSA that you can contact, and they can work with you through that process. So when you try to retrieve information that's forgotten, it's going to ask if you want to receive it by text, email, or through the challenge questions. Always try to use the text or the email. That's why it's important to have a valid email or cell phone on hand. That's the easiest way. It's live. You can get the information right away. If you have to use the challenge questions, after you do that and you get them all correct, you have to wait 30 minutes before you can continue on with the process. So use the challenge questions as a last resort. And also when you're using the challenge questions, it may ask you the same questions 2 or 3 times. And you're going through the process and you're like, this is right. Don't change it. If you know the answer is right, continue to answer the question over and over again. Otherwise, it will lock you out of the system. So lastly, you want to make sure that you submit your FAFSA when you're done. Don't just save it. Make sure you hit the submit button. You will get a confirmation page immediately to the email, and all information is communicated directly with the student. So parents, you will have to harass your child because they will be getting communication on a regular basis. Read that, confirm that all the information is correct. After you submit the FAFSA application, all communication is with the financial aid offices at the colleges that you are planning to attend. So contact the financial aid offices if you have questions regarding your FAFSA information after you have submitted the FAFSA. Within 3 to 5 business days, you'll get the results. If you have to mail it in 4 to 6 weeks, you will receive something called a student aid report. It will tell you what that EFC is that Nashua talked about, as well as if you've been selected for verification. Last thing, if you're selected for verification, the financial aid offices will be reaching out to you to provide information to complete your file. You have to provide that documentation as soon as possible, or you will not receive an official award notice. And you must receive an official award notice, not an estimated award. So make sure that whatever's been requested, that you're submitting it to the financial aid office as soon as possible. And this is an example of what the student aid report. Here's that little asterisk that will let you know that you've been selected for verification, and it will also indicate that in the body of the letter. Right, so start early, understand the process, ask questions, evaluate all your options, and most importantly, don't forget to ask questions. We are here to help. There's no dumb questions in financial aid. We'll be happy to assist you. So this is Nashua and I's contact information. If you have any questions that we haven't been able to address in this workshop, please feel free to reach out to us at any time. We would be happy to assist you.
Thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Nashua, for the session this evening. I hope our participants found it to be beneficial. I'm going to leave the contact info up here for a few more seconds so folks can copy that information down.
Can you tell them where this recording is going to be posted? That's one of the questions in here, and I'm not sure how to answer it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So a recording of this particular webinar will be posted on the website that you went to register for this particular session. So as you can see my slide here, and I'll go to the presentation view. But the recording will be available at the StriveScan website in about a week from now, where you went to register for this particular program. Okay. Once we close out, you'll get a quick survey. We ask all participants to take some time to provide us some feedback. And other than that, I appreciate our presenters' time tonight. Ms. Briggs and Ms. Bowling, thank you for your time, and appreciate the information you shared this evening. Folks, be safe and be healthy. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye now.